In the scorching heat of the 1920s Arizona desert, where the sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth and dust devils danced across the endless expanse of sand and scrubland, a young woman named Elena found herself in the most desperate situation of her life. She sat on the hard, unforgiving ground of an abandoned cattle ranch, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin, a thick shawl pulled over her head to shield her from the relentless sun. Her black dress, once elegant and fashionable with its pearl necklaces and fine fabric, was now dusty and torn. The gold bracelets on her wrists, remnants of a life that seemed like a distant dream, caught the harsh light as she raised one trembling hand to her face, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her sunburned cheeks. Elena had been traveling with a wealthy merchant caravan from San Francisco to Santa Fe, serving as a companion to a rich widow who had promised her a new life in the East. But 3 days ago, everything had gone horribly wrong. Bandits had attacked their convoy in the dead of night, their gunfire shattering the peaceful desert silence. In the chaos and confusion, Elena had been separated from the group, pursued by 2 of the outlaws who saw an opportunity for ransom. They had brought her to this desolate place, tied her up, and left her here while they rode off to demand money from her employer. That was yesterday morning. They had promised to return, but as the hours stretched into an entire day and night, Elena began to lose hope. The desert was unforgiving. Without water, without shelter, she knew her chances of survival were dwindling with each passing hour. The old wooden corral fence behind her creaked in the hot wind, and she could see the weathered buildings of what had once been a thriving ranch now standing as hollow monuments to dreams long abandoned. 2 figures moved on the distant structure, ranch hands or drifters perhaps, but they were too far away to notice her plight or too indifferent to care. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked and bleeding. She had stopped crying hours ago, not from acceptance of her fate, but simply because her body had no more tears to give. The coiled rope beside her, which the bandits had used to secure her to a fence post before deciding she was too weak to run anyway, lay in the dust like a snake waiting to strike. Then, through the shimmering heat waves that distorted the horizon, she saw him. A lone rider on a dark horse, moving with purpose across the desert landscape. At first, Elena thought it was a mirage, another cruel trick of her dehydrated mind. But as the figure grew closer, she could make out the details. A tall man in a brown leather vest over a checkered shirt, a cowboy hat shading his face from the sun, riding with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. His name was James Crawford, though Elena wouldn't learn that until later. He was a horse trader and ranch hand who had been traveling between settlements, delivering a string of horses to a buyer in Tucson when he decided to take a shortcut through this abandoned property. James had seen many things in his 32 years on the frontier, but the sight of a woman bound and left alone in the desert still shocked him to his core. He spurred his horse forward, dismounting before the animal had even come to a complete stop. His boots hit the dust with purpose as he rushed toward her, his weathered face creased with concern. Elena looked up at him through exhausted, hopeless eyes, barely able to process that someone had actually found her. For a moment, she wondered if this was death finally coming to claim her, taking the form of a kind stranger to ease her passing. James knelt down on one knee beside her, his rough hands already working at the knots that bound her wrists. His touch was gentle despite the urgency in his movements, careful not to hurt her already abraded skin. He could see she was in bad shape, dehydrated and exhausted, her lips moving soundlessly as if trying to speak but unable to form the words. Without hesitation, he pulled his canteen from his belt and held it to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand as he gave her small sips of water. Too much too fast would make her sick, he knew. He had seen men die in the desert before, understood the delicate balance required to bring someone back from the edge. As the water touched her tongue, Elena felt life flooding back into her body. The fog that had settled over her mind began to lift, and she looked into the face of her rescuer with growing clarity. He had kind eyes, she noticed, brown and steady, with crow's feet at the corners that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. There was a mustache on his upper lip and stubble on his jaw, and when he spoke, his voice was low and reassuring, asking her what had happened, who had done this to her, whether she was hurt beyond the obvious dehydration and exposure. Elena tried to answer, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, cracked and painful. James told her not to strain herself, that there would be time for explanations later. First, he needed to get her out of this heat and somewhere safe. He glanced around the abandoned ranch, noting the two figures still visible in the distance near the old buildings. They hadn't moved or shown any interest in what was happening. Squatters or drifters, James figured. The kind who minded their own business to avoid their own troubles. As James finished untying the ropes and helped Elena to her feet, her legs nearly buckled beneath her. She hadn't stood in over 24 hours, and her body was weak from the ordeal. James caught her easily, supporting her weight as if she weighed nothing at all. It was in that moment, with her leaning against his strength, feeling the solid warmth of another human being after so many hours of lonely desperation, that Elena made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She grabbed the front of his vest with what little strength she had, pulling herself up to look him directly in the eyes. Her voice, though still weak and raspy, carried an intensity that made James pause and listen carefully to every word. "Take me with you," she whispered, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage, her dark eyes pleading with an urgency that went beyond mere rescue. "Please, wherever you're going, take me with you. They'll come back for me. The men who did this. They'll come back, and if you leave me at the nearest town, they'll find me. I have no one, nowhere to go. Take me with you." James looked into those desperate, determined eyes and saw something that stirred his heart in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had been alone for so long, drifting from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or make real connections. His wife had died of fever 5 years ago, and since then, he had built walls around his heart, convincing himself that solitude was easier than risking that kind of pain again. But this woman, this stranger who had been left to die in the desert, was asking him for something more than rescue. She was asking for a chance at a new life, and somehow, impossibly, he found himself wanting to give it to her. The practical part of his mind raised immediate objections. He didn't know her, didn't know what trouble she might bring. The men who had done this to her might indeed come looking, and that could mean danger for both of them. He had a simple life, a quiet life, and taking on a companion, especially a woman, would complicate everything. People would talk, would make assumptions. But as he looked at her, at the courage it must have taken to ask a complete stranger for such a tremendous leap of faith, he found all his objections melting away like morning frost under the desert sun. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady and sure. "I'll take you with me. But we need to move fast, before those men come back or before anyone else shows up asking questions." Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. She nodded, unable to find words adequate to express what his simple agreement meant to her. James helped her over to his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and lifted Elena into the saddle with careful strength. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins, and Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling safer than she had felt in days. As they rode away from the abandoned ranch, leaving behind only the dusty evidence of her ordeal and the coiled rope that had bound her, Elena watched the desert landscape pass by with new eyes. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The oppressive heat of midday was giving way to the cooler temperatures of evening. Somewhere behind them, she knew, the men who had taken her captive might be returning to find her gone. Let them search, she thought. She was no longer that helpless, abandoned woman chained to her fate. She was riding into an uncertain future, yes, but she was riding with someone who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. Someone who had agreed to her desperate plea without demanding explanations or conditions. James guided Copper toward the north, away from the main roads where they might encounter the bandits or anyone else looking for a lone woman. He knew of a small settlement about 20 miles distant, run by a Quaker family who asked few questions and offered sanctuary to those in need. They could rest there for a night, get Elena properly fed and recovered, and then decide on their next move. As they rode, he could feel her gradually relaxing against him, her breathing becoming steadier and deeper. The terror and exhaustion were slowly releasing their grip on her body. "What's your name?" James asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of Kappa's hooves on the hard-packed earth. "Elena," she replied, her voice stronger now with water and hope. "Elena Maria Vasquez." He nodded, filing the name away. "James Crawford," he offered in return. "Most folks just call me Crawford." She smiled slightly at that, A small expression, but one that transformed her dusty, exhausted face into something approaching beauty. "Thank you, Crawford," she said softly. "For stopping. For not riding past. For saying yes." They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts about what this unexpected meeting might mean for their futures. James wondered what he had gotten himself into, what complications and responsibilities he had just accepted. But underneath the practical concerns was something else, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, a feeling that perhaps his solitary wandering had been leading him to this exact moment, this exact person who needed exactly what he could offer. Elena, for her part, marveled at the strange turns life could take. Yesterday she had been certain she would die alone in the desert, her bones picked clean by vultures, her story never told. Today she was riding toward an unknown future with a stranger who had become her savior, her protector, and perhaps, if fate was kind, something more. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if the bandits would find them or if James would eventually tire of his impulsive decision to help her. But for now, in this moment, with a desert sunset painting the world in gold and the steady presence of a good man at her back, Elena allowed herself to hope. And sometimes, in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, hope was the most valuable thing a person could possess.